Imagine you're a school administrator who doesn't want to go along with the equity agenda, and you receive this in your email inbox this week. A training being put on by the Equity Literacy Institute, communicated to you through official channels at your job where you draw your paycheck, describing you as the enemy, in effect. I would call that a hostile workplace.
Liberty's Ledger with Walter Hudson. Today's topic: hostility toward real educators in Minnesota.
Education in Minnesota is in rough shape, and there are a lot of reasons for that. It's a complicated issue, but some aspects, I would argue the most important aspects, aren't that complicated at all. It comes down to priorities. What is it that we're actually trying to do? Is our mission to educate kids? Is our mission to get them to be able to read, to be able to do arithmetic, to be able to understand basic facts about the world in which they live, to equip them with the knowledge and skills necessary for them to successfully negotiate reality? Is that our mission, or is it something else? And at the root of the fundamental problems with education in the state of Minnesota is that the mission has largely been something else. And specifically, it's been an ideological mission to create activists rather than citizens, to create children who are prepared to resist the system rather than participate in it and be contributing members of society. And this is something that, as a Republican elected official, as a state representative, my first term in office, I have grown to appreciate the nuance in this debate, in this fight. And by that I mean, it's really easy to simplify the definition of the sides at play in this debate. And I think we have mistakenly on the right, amongst conservatives and Republicans, and have been guilty of this, painted with a broad brush that everyone who is associated with or involved with the public education system is somehow complicit in this effort to replace the educational mission with an ideological and political mission. That is absolutely not true. I have certainly discovered, both anecdotally in terms of my own experience and development of relationships with people in my own local school district, the school district that I send my sons to, and also in my engagement at the legislature in St. Paul, that there are a wide array of educators, administrators, teachers, school board members, certainly, who are on the right side of this debate. The problem is that the loudest voices, the voices that are allowed to express themselves, as opposed to the ones that are systemically oppressed, ironically, the loudest voices are the ones that are pushing the ideological nonsense and the political nonsense and trying to successfully have captured the educational institutions here in the state of Minnesota to turn them into activist factories rather than accomplishing the educational mission of preparing students to be able to go out into the world and create value and offer value and be contributing members of society. And it's from one such individual within the public education system, someone who is on the right side of this debate, that I became privy to an email that was sent out recently to school administrators in the state of Minnesota by a group called Equity Literacy Institute. And I want to share that with you here now. So they are promoting a summer institute. It's going to take place in just a few days on June 27th. And the title of it, as you can see here, is Surviving the Attack on Equity, Educational Justice in Tumultuous Times. And they start off by asking, are you an educator at any level who is struggling to respond to and manage increasing resistance to your equity efforts? Do you need strategies for pushing equity efforts forward despite the resistance? And this is just absolutely fascinating to me. That one paragraph and the fact that this was sent out through official channels to school administrators throughout the state of Minnesota, this is a confession. This is a public confession by this institution that their mission is not the educational mission. Their mission is not to take students from knowing virtually nothing to knowing what they need to know in order to successfully negotiate reality, to instead creating activists in this equity space. And it's an interesting stake to put in the ground that establishes the dynamic as they see it, what their job is. So the folks who are pushing this, and again, they're pushing this to public school employees, all right? So folks who draw a paycheck from the taxpayer for the purpose of educating our kids. And this is the dynamic that they describe. They talk about struggling to respond to and manage increasing resistance to equity efforts. And they offer strategies for pushing equity efforts forward despite the resistance. Well, where's this resistance coming from? It's coming from you and me. It's coming from the people, capital P. It's coming from the public. It's coming from parents, taxpayers, residents, the folks who created and established these institutions for the purpose of educating our kids. The dynamic that they are acknowledging here and confessing to is that they are in a position that they view their relationship as one of conflict with us rather than service of us, which is how it's supposed to be. Let me put it this way. You've heard the phrase taxation is theft, right? Which is an interesting idea to put out there in the ether. What does that mean, taxation is theft? Obviously, taxes are a necessary part of our political economy in order to be able to provide for legitimate public goods that serve the interests of all residents, all taxpayers, all people who live within the state of Minnesota. I think the sentiment that taxation is theft gains legitimacy when those resources that are coerced from the people who earned them, taxpayers, are actually utilized against the interests of those same taxpayers. And that's what we see expressed right here. An intention to resist efforts from you, from me, from we the people, to guide the educational trajectory back onto the path where it belongs, focused on reading, focused on arithmetic, focused on science, focused on instilling in children the skills and knowledge they need in order to successfully negotiate reality. They want to resist that, and they are holding summer trainings for public educators in order to equip them with strategies in order to resist you. It is a confrontational dynamic. It is a dynamic of conflict with the people who they are supposed to serve. That is prima facie inappropriate. This is inappropriate for them to be doing what they're doing. And there ought to be discipline. There ought to be consequences as a result of this. Now let's talk a little bit about why there isn't. And I've talked about this before. I have a video, a long video that I put together from where I broke down a school board meeting that took place in the Elk River Independent School District 728 towards the end of last year, where 2 school board members were censured. And the reason why they were censured by their board was because they were engaged in such violations, and these were described as violations, as holding town hall meetings, talking to constituents, talking to staff members in the school district, speaking with legislators such as myself down in St. Paul. These were the things that were described as violations by the school board, and these school board members were censured for it. And their basis for doing so was a policy that the district had adopted from model policy provided by the Minnesota School Board Association. And what that policy dictates is effectively that your school board members aren't school board members. that they are barred from engaging with the public, that they are barred from engaging with the legislature, that everything they do must be filtered through the auspices of the school superintendent, that they are obligated to express public support for whatever the district is doing at all times, that they cannot publicly dissent with policy, that they cannot publicly dissent with majority school board decisions. It is quite literally the the end of democracy in the school district setting, in the school board setting. That's what the Minnesota School Board Association has affected through this model policy that has been adopted broadly by many districts throughout the state. And so you don't have the reason why they're able to engage with such audacity on this front. The reason why they're able to do that is because they know that they are insulated from consequence. They know that the system has been rigged to empower those who are on board with the agenda of pushing equity, as they say, that's their words here, pushing equity. They know that the system is rigged to enable that and rigged to resist you and parents. And frankly, any public educators who don't want to go along with the program. And that is why the loudest voices are the ones who are on message with this nonsense. And you're not hearing from the teachers, administrators, school board members who don't agree with what's happening in Minnesota's public education system. By definition, that is the breakdown of democracy. You cannot argue that you have a democratic process governing these institutions when one side of the conversation has been effectively silenced through coercion. That's what the result of these policies are. Before I let you go here today, let's just continue through this email. They go on to say, the resistance isn't new, but in our experience, parts of it do appear to be increasingly well-funded and well-organized. Of course, it has other sources too, such as individuals within our organizations who range from people who feel they already get equity and don't need to be challenged further to people who are ideologically opposed to the objectives of anti-racism and equity. So again, this is an acknowledgement of what I said at the outset, that we cannot paint with a broad brush. There are folks within the public education system who agree with us, who recognize the folly of what is taking place, and who frankly desperately want to see kids properly educated and not indoctrinated into this nonsense. And those folks have been painted by this organization as the enemy. I mean, imagine you're a school administrator who doesn't want to go along with the equity agenda, and you receive this in your email inbox this week. A training being put on by the Equity Literacy Institute, communicated to you through official channels at your job, where you draw your paycheck, describing you as the enemy, in effect. I would call that a hostile workplace. I would call that a hostile work environment. And yet that's the situation that any sane, education-focused public educator in the state of Minnesota currently finds themselves in. It's abhorrent, and it needs to end.
Liberty's Ledger with Walter Hudson. Like, share, and subscribe to show your support. Follow Walter on X at Walter Hudson. Visit hudsonformn.com.